Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is Faith Works on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for Faith Works, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Faith Works on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked impact on our Catholic faith. On Faith Works, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. Welcome to Saints in the Making, where we explore the lives of holy men and women who continue to inspire us on our journey of faith. This month, we turn our attention to three remarkable witnesses in the life of the Church: Saint André Bessette, Saint Anthony of the Desert, and Saint Angela Merici, whose faith, humility, and dedication to God continue to guide us as we grow in holiness during the month of January. We're once again joined by Rob Agnelli, who will guide us through these saints, helping us see how their lives speak into our own call to holiness today. Welcome back, Rob.
Good to be here.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I realize in the midst of researching the various saints and feast days that we cover, and also, coming up with just different points of that I'd like for us to discuss, how much I need each and every one of these saints for a particular reason. Are you experiencing the same thing?
Yeah, I think we talked about this to begin with. Like, for me, what this has given is just more friends. Because, it's anytime you can make doctrines come alive, like the communion of saints, and it becomes very real because when you really begin to study the lives of the saints, and I think this is not jumping ahead to Angela Merici, but her dad used to read her Lives of the Saints. And so she set her aspirations on being a saint, right? And so anytime you really begin to get to know the saints, you begin to relate to them, right? And then when, sort of faith kicks in and you're like, well, these people are still alive and still active in the church, then it really does become a sort of an area of growth, right? Like your faith just expands.
And not that I want to say that we certainly do this. We don't. We haven't done it in a few years, but especially when our kids were younger. And last month, preparing for Christmas, we would do the Jesse tree and the nightly readings together. It's typically dark, of course, at night now, and, we have our fire going in the fireplace sometimes. It's so nice to have somebody reading aloud. So wouldn't it be great to encourage that too, reading aloud to our children when they're young, or even to your spouse about particular saints' lives, how efficacious that would be.
Yeah, the other thing we do, especially right around the New Year, is we each get a saint in our family.
I forgot. Yeah. We talked about this last year.
Yeah, so we each get a saint, which will be perfect. There's, the time of year that this is, that we're talking about. So, I think there's all kinds of random saint generators or something online.
How do you guys do it, Rob?
We will pick a group of saints. Allison and I will, and sort of put them in a hat.
Okay.
And maybe that's just, my saint generator, my analog saint generator. But yeah.
Well, where do you go? I'm curious to pick these saints to put in the hat.
Typically, it's just saints that we've kind of just either been talking about or more of the saint is finding you. I mean, I think the saint generators are fine.
Yeah.
It's just, I think we started doing it that way, and now we continue to do it that way. We have several times just used one of those saint generators.
And I know that, especially with being in Bible study with your beautiful wife, we will be doing the same thing, I think, in this Bible study too. So I think it's a great thing to do. So, sorry for digressing, but okay. So we're going to talk about these three amazing saints. And Saint André Bessette is near and dear to my heart. I was not able to go see his relics in Montreal when we were in Canada, but my daughter was, and she was blown away. And there's some connection with St. Joseph. So why don't you tell me about his early life and especially his poor health and limited education? How did this shape him spiritually?
Yeah, so he was born in 1845 in Canada. He was the eighth of 10 children. His father was a furniture maker who ends up dying when he's like 10 years old, and then his mom dies 2 years later. And so at that point, him and his siblings are kind of separated. He was mostly a sickly child. I mean, they kind of he was emergency baptized, if that's a verb. And his mother really doted on him because of that, because he was always kind of frail and sick. He had stomach issues, couldn't eat a whole lot. And he's a very small child, and actually if you see pictures of him, I mean, he's probably like 4'9" or 4'10".
Oh.
He's gaunt.
Yes.
Yeah. And so always like sort of wrestling with, and even when he gets, to be an adult, his health is just not good, which is probably why he, ends up being so compassionate. And so he, at the time, he ends up coming to the United States to kind of work in a factory at the back end of the Civil War, stays here for a while, and then providentially he returns back to his hometown and runs into an older friend of his who, Father André Provençal, who was a priest, obviously, and was not a priest when André St. André was, knew him. And so they kind of reconnected. And Father Andre finds, really sees something growing, grace really growing in him, eventually sends him to this school run by the Congregation of Holy Cross with just a simple note saying, "I'm sending you a saint." And so that's, ends up, that's how he gets there.
So was this in Montreal? What's the name of the village where he's from?
Saint Césaire's.
Okay.
I think it's just outside of Montreal, right?
Okay. So beautiful. Oh my gosh. Have you been there?
No, I don't know a whole lot about, I've been to Canada once, and I think I was, in Ontario, but I don't really know that much about Canadian geography or anything.
Well, so you need to just go straight up to Quebec City, keep going north, and you'll end up there eventually, actually going through the border first. And then a little south to the left is where Montreal is. And it is beautiful terrain, beautiful architecture. And Saint Anne de Beaupré, which is in Quebec City, is such a beautiful basilica too. So lots of areas to visit up there. And during the summer, not the winter. No, you can handle it in the winter. All right. So, and we talked a little bit about his devotion to St. Joseph, which I absolutely love. What prompted this devotion?
Yeah, I think that was really his only inheritance from his mother. So his mother very early on taught him to go to Joseph for everything. And so that sort of stuck with him, that he would go through Joseph for everything. And it was really almost the key of his sainthood and his healing power and everything. Everything was go to Joseph, and he would tell other people to do it too. In fact, he called himself St. Joseph's little dog, because he felt like he was running, always kind of running little errands and sitting at his feet. But the other thing too that people often miss, and if you had asked him, he would have thought that the devotion to Joseph was just normal because it's an imitation of Christ, because Christ was devoted to Joseph. But he would have said that he had a devotion to the Passion of Christ. So he used to, he would sit with people, and they would just listen to him retell the story of the Passion, and he would have people convert just from him, because he spent so much time meditating on it and learning to love Jesus in the Passion that he was captivated by it, and he also captivated other people retelling the story.
Did you find in your research any retellings or writings of him retelling?
Just that he had done it.
I wonder if there's a way to get that in writing, because that would certainly be worthy of reflection too, so you could actually hear what St. Andre was saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's one of his friends wrote an early biography about him. And he said he would just sit for 2 or 3 hours with him, with St. Andre, and he would just tell the story of the Passion, and he'd be totally captivated by it.
So I wonder if it's in that biography.
Yeah, perhaps.
Okay. So, and how did he come to be a humble doorkeeper?
So he goes after Father Andre sends him. He goes to the congregation of the Holy Cross, and they make him the porter. But he ends up that they essentially say, like, you're too sick, you're never going to get better, you can't do this. And so he would he actually after they sort of rejected him, the bishop came through the door. And he told the bishop, I want to do this. And he goes, oh, you can do this. And so they did, the bishop went right around the superiors. And so they ended up having to take him. But he also, ultimately, like, again, this is, God's providence. He had so many interactions with people. And that really, it started to become where people would seek him out because of his, not just for his healing power, but for his counsel. And like, he really understood how to help people encounter Jesus. And, he was almost a little impatient with people because he wanted to just get to the point, right? Like, he just wanted to get to the point, like, what do you need? And let me tell you what you really need. Mm-hmm. And so he would, when he was at the door, and that's, I think, where he sort of realized that God had made him to be an instrument of healing.
So what makes him different than, or maybe during his time, what made him different than the other religious around him that made him understand how he could encounter people? What was it that set him apart?
I think that's just part of his it was part of his personality. And when grace perfects nature, mm-hmm. And he had a really kind of funny way of healing people too, where he would, there's a story of he was visiting a child because he worked at the college there, mm-hmm. And the child was sick, and he walks into the room and he goes, "Why are you being so lazy?" And the kid is like, "Well, I'm sick." And he's like, "No, you're not. Go outside and play." And the kid gets up and goes outside and plays. And he would do this kind of regularly. He would just say, "No, you're not." Mm-hmm. And it would just be like that, right? And for that reason, he sort of made a lot of enemies because they're like, "What are you doing? Like, you're telling this kid who was like bedridden to go out and play, and like you're going to hurt somebody." And so in that way, but all of a sudden there's just these, and I think if you go now to the oratory, there's just piles and piles and piles of crutches and canes, and all from him, right? Where he would just very simply, he would tell someone, either he'd pull his, like, "You're not sick," or he'd just tell them to ask St. Joseph. Mm-hmm. And so, very clear that, he was clear about who was doing it, mm-hmm. Which always, makes someone, actually way more efficacious. So I think that was part of, his particular gift that God had given him, was this simplicity of just being able to encounter people.
Simplicity. And I wonder too, if he, took the time. I mean, as a doorkeeper, you're there present with everybody that comes, and you're not, trying to push back to the next person or distracted by other obligations that you have.
Yeah, and that was one of the beauties of, because there was a rule of life for a doorkeeper in the congregation, right? And one of the rules,
what I was getting at.
He was very obedient. Like we've talked about before, about how obedience is just such a pathway to grace, right? And he was very obedient to it. And, the rules were like he was supposed to, welcome these people as if they are Christ. And he took that very literally, and he did it.
What were some of the surprising things that you came across in his encounters with people? Was there anything that really stood out to you, Rob?
Yeah, there's a story about, I think I said that he sort of made enemies. There's one story about a doctor who was really kind of out to get him. And, of course, providentially, his wife is, really sick. She has some sort of bleeding disorder in her sinuses. And she goes and tells him, she goes, "Go get Brother Andre." And he's like, "No, I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm gonna go get him. We'll try something else." And, he just keeps delaying it and keeps trying to find all these ways to take care of the hemorrhaging. And so he finally asked Brother Andre to come and pray for her. And Brother Andre just walks into the room, and the bleeding stops immediately. And this doctor has a sort of a deep conversion because he witnesses this, right? And this doctor then goes around telling people, like, go to St. Joseph for healing.
Something that I find incredibly appealing with St. Andre is his hidden faithfulness and the power of that. And I really admire that in other people that I've encountered. They're not, so passionate about what they believe that they feel like they need to knock everybody else over the head with a stick. So tell me about how his life does that, how it speaks to the hidden power of faithfulness.
I think the fact that when he would meet someone, even though everyone considered him to be a living saint, he would ask them to pray for his conversion. Like, I think that is the key to like if you want to capture his spirit perfectly, is, he saw, like, we've talked about before, a lot of the saints see themselves as witnesses to what God is doing through them, and not necessarily like instruments in that way, right?
Wait. Differentiate between that.
Yeah,
I think there's a big...
Yeah, so I think when, I guess it's a fine point, but if you see yourself as an instrument, somehow there is there's an elevation in your mind, like, oh, I'm this special instrument. When you see yourself... Like spiritual pride. Yeah, a little bit. But when you see yourself as a witness, like God is just doing this around me, and I just happen to be here with it. Okay. And I think that to me, that what is important about that is, I think that's the only way to maintain zeal for what God is doing, because you're amazed by what he's doing, and you don't become jaded. Right? Like, I don't know how many thousands of people he probably healed, right? But when he is like on the lookout to see, like, what is God doing? And, he's going to do it around me. That's exciting, right?
Yes,
but if you're like, oh, today, like 14 people are going to come in between 8 and 9, and I'm going to have to, maybe God will heal some of them. And so you can see that kind of, you're like, okay, like it becomes commonplace. And I think it's the only way to protect yourself from that is to really like expect God to do amazing things while you're around rather than through you, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It makes tremendous sense. So yeah, certainly asking for St. André Bessette to pray for us in the work that we do here as Christ's witnesses. And watching joyfully as he does, in spite of ourselves. Okay, now St. Anthony of the Desert. Wow, much earlier than St. André Bessette, 200 AD, 250 AD to 350 AD. Who is he? And what do we know about him? Yeah,
I'm actually kind of excited to talk about him. I like, so St. Athanasius, who's sort of a contemporary of St. Anthony, wrote a biography called The Life of St. Anthony, which has probably been, I don't know how many saints have read that book. A really cool story. Like even in like the Confessions, Augustine talks about how he read it.
Is it meaty, hard to digest?
No, not at all. I mean, it's basically biographical, the first part, and then it's really like the second part is Anthony's rule of life for monks. But really not necessarily just for monks, for us too. I mean, it gets into, okay, like how do you fight spiritual warfare? it is definitely one of my sort of go-to books for spiritual reading because you just kind of keep culling new stuff out of it each time you read it. And it's pretty short.
You said something, Rob, that I want to kind of cover just a little bit, if you don't mind. You said it's not just for monks, it's for us too. And I had a priest tell me one time, and I cannot remember which classic it was, but it was pretty meaty. And I told him that I was really diving into it and trying to digest a lot of the messages that were in there. And he said, Ellen, you realize it was written for monks. It's not for you. And I went, what? So I think, there
are some books that are like that, right? That, that are a little bit difficult to relate to. The Life of St. Anthony is not one of them.
Yes.
Because in a lot of ways, he's inventing what it really means to be a monk. And so he's still sort of like, what I think is powerful about him is he teaches you how to separate yourself from the world. Right. Okay. And again, like Saint Angelo Merici was also good about this, like how to separate yourself from the world, whether you're in it or not. if that makes sense, right?
Okay. And how do you visualize that? How can you summarize that?
Yeah. So like, well, you could take like the example of Anthony, right? So like his call comes when he hears the gospel of the rich young man. Like his parents died, and he has to take care of his sister. Parents pretty wealthy. He walks into church, and the first thing he hears is the gospel of the rich young man, and he thinks he thinks and knows it's addressed to him personally, to go sell all that you have and follow me, right? And so what he did was he recognized that there was an extraordinary call there, but that like the Christian life is meant to be lived in the world, right? And so there are some extraordinary calls out, right? Like just like the rich young man, right? Like the rich young man is not for all of us, but what is for all of us is Christ is calling us radically to follow him, right? And so what Anthony gives us, I think, and this is why I like the life of Anthony, is like he gives us some, I guess you could call it like, I actually like to say this because of the real, he actually gives us the rules for radicals, right? Like the real rules for radicals on like how to follow like Christ in the midst of like turmoil.
So real rules for radicals. It sounds like you're referencing something else that I'm totally not familiar with.
And so there's a Marxist book.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. So this one is the real one.
Yeah, this is the
that
real
we can
rules
use.
for radicals.
All right. So before we go on, if you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with Faith Works on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I'm speaking with Rob Agnelli about 3 amazing saints that we cover in January: Saint André Bessette, Saint Anthony of the Desert, and Saint Angela Merici. We are grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. All right. So obviously with what you've been talking about with St. Anthony, he's known as the father of monasticism with his writings. How did his writings or his way influence Christian spirituality?
Yeah, what he essentially does is, after he responds to that initial call, he keeps trying to kind of separate himself and gets a little further away from the world. At first, he ends up living in a cemetery, and he has this like literally fleshly battle with the devil. His friends find him pass out in the cemetery. They revive him, and then he turns around and goes even deeper into solitude. He goes off into what he calls the outer mountain, and he lives there for 20 years. And
where is this?
This is in Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in Egypt. So just outside of like Alexandria.
Okay.
And so he goes and he's off on this outer mountain for 20 years. He has his friends twice a year bring him some bread. And that's it. Right. And so after 20 years, his friends are like, okay, it's time to go get him. Like he's been there. Like he's probably on death's door.
Long?
20 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 20 years of solitude.
How old was he at this time, Rob?
This was probably, I don't know. He's probably from about, he's probably maybe 50 or so by the time he comes out.
Okay.
I
don't know. It sounds kind of appealing right now. Sorry.
No, so there is like for all of us that's appealing, right? So that's because like we all want to be, we don't want to be lonely, but we want to be alone with God, right? And like we are made for that, and so that's why it's appealing to every one of us, right? And that's why like when we talked about Philip Neri, like St. Anthony had a tremendous effect on Philip Neri. He also had a tremendous effect on St. John Henry Newman, where what they tried to do is create cloisters in the city, right? Where they could go just to be alone, but they knew their call wasn't to go off to the desert, right? So that, again, that radical go off all by yourself. But they knew like the necessity of creating space in your life where you are alone with God. And so, so he spends 20 years there. They're expecting to find this just, decrepit or emaciated man. They go and they're like, this guy is like super healthy, so they eventually force him back. And then he he ends up retreating again. And the next time he brings some men with him, because now he feels like, he's ready to teach other men how to do it.
And so did they stay ultimately in this area and they built the community?
Yeah, well, they end up going further out, like towards the coast. So, so during the time, like sort of what's going on too, it's during the Arian heresy. And so he develops this relationship with St. Athanasius, who was really persecuted during that time. It's, if you've ever heard of Athanasius against the world, right? Like everybody was turning on him. And Anthony sort of offers him solitude. And so he goes off like a final time, and they only see him 2 more times where he emerges. One time is because Athanasius asks him to come help him kind of fight the Arian heresy. And then another time is when a persecution had arisen, and he goes to court to sort of support the soon to be martyrs. And the thing is, it's crazy about it is like the judges want nothing to do with him because they know he's a holy man, and they're like, okay, like we don't want anything to do with this guy. So first they try to run him out, telling him, he smells bad. And so he goes and cleans himself up. And then it comes back the next day, and he sits right in the front row, kind of cheering these martyrs on, which is beautiful, right? Like he's not trying to separate himself from everybody else, right? Like his goal is to be, with God, but that doesn't mean that he's not with the church also. And,
I've often heard of spiritual warfare with the Desert Fathers, and I'm curious, how did St. Anthony understand this and confront temptation of the demonic? What would you say?
John Henry Newman says that Anthony essentially saw himself or viewed himself as continuing Christ's battle with Satan in the desert. So he really realized that was part of his call, like was to fight, principalities and powers. And like in that experience, though, and this is where I think it's really important, is he gives this sort of blueprint for fighting, for all of us to fight demonic temptation, right? Like he talks about, and this is where I like the second half of the book. He talks about like how they start. Like they start with just sort of implanting sort of evil thoughts, right? And then they'll try to intimidate you. And he, even to the point of, he would often just mock the devil because, they'd come as these wild beasts, and he's like, well, if you're that scary, why do you have to come as wild beasts? And he just totally dismissed them. And then, which I think is really the most important part, is he really Athanasius writes about how Anthony taught how to discern when there's angels, when they're sort of masquerading as angels of light. Right. And which I think is a temptation people don't necessarily always grasp, right? That what the devil wants to do a lot of times, like he's not going to tempt you to do bad things because you're like, I'm not going to do that. Right. But he's like, okay, let's do this other good thing instead of this good thing. And so that sort of flitting, I call it like flitting about, is something, a lot of people, especially people with generous hearts, right? Like, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And so for Anthony, and this is why I think like what he did was pretty amazing. Like he sensed the call and he followed it, right? And never deviated from it for no reason. And in the end, one of the beautiful things I like is that he's like, okay, the best weapon is just humility, right? And as a sign of that, right, he began to, and he's the first one to do this, began to wear a hood, because a hood was something a child wore. And so he started in inventing monasticism. He also invents the garb in which they dress like children.
Okay, so I'm curious, what can modern Christians learn? I mean, obviously, and it sounds like you use St. Athanasius's book as a reference on St. Anthony's life for yourself, Rob. But what can we learn from St. Anthony, especially about detachment, discipline, and spiritual focus in a noisy world, would you say? Yeah,
I think, again, like this is where I go back to when you are able to sort of read it with filtering out the radicalness, in the sense of like grasping the principles behind it, which, all the good spiritual classics, like if you can grasp the principles, and, his principles are sort of really simple, is, be singularly focused on holiness, right? So like he said, every morning, wake up, pray for zeal, right? Pray for zeal, because that's what's going to get you through the day. And ever since I read that years ago, like that is one of my prayers each morning. I'm like, Lord, fill me with zeal.
Zeal
right?
for your house will consume me.
Yeah. Just, let that fire just keep burning and burning and burning and burning.
That's a great point.
And everything just sort of comes from there, right? Like everything follows when, like I liken it to like when you first met Jim, like you were excited to see him and you were like, not that you're not excited now, but like there's just this
right.
newness and freshness,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we get that too with the Lord, right? And so like, I ask every day, which is what St. Anthony did, which is probably why he was able to make it so long. I was just like, refresh that, like renew that in me every single day. And that to me is like the most important principle that he teaches, and everything else sort of just follows in its place, right?
What a great direction to be focused on. Yeah, thank you for that. Wake up and pray for zeal in the morning. Okay, so Saint Angela Merici, 1474. She was born and died in 1540. What was her upbringing like, and how did her early experiences awaken her desire for God?
Yeah, she is born sort of into a simple peasant's life.
Okay. Where?
Parents,
Italian,
simple farmer.
obviously.
Yep, near Brescia, which is in northern Italy. So parents both pious. But both of her parents, sort of similar to André Bessette, were died by the time she was 10. She goes and lives with a wealthy uncle, her and her sister and her brother, and her sister shortly thereafter dies, which greatly sort of distressed her because she died without the sacraments. And so she was obviously very worried about her sister's soul. And she has this beautiful vision in which the Blessed Virgin Mary appears to her. She's about, maybe 12 or 13 at the time. And on the vision is this ladder with all these virgins on it. And her sister comes off of the ladder and gives her mission. All right, and tells her like what the Lord wants from her, which is this beautiful, he wants her to establish this company of consecrated virgins. So she receives this grace of not only a call but also consolation. Again, coming through the Blessed Mother after she had lost her mother, and then the other thing too, which we already briefly talked about, which I think it sort of sits with that zeal, and is just her father was always read them stories of the saints, like I said. And so it stirred up, in her that desire to be a saint, because, just like, we all, like as kids, right? Like kids develop like hero worshiping, right? And, in our culture, it's usually celebrities. But for her, it was saints. And so she grew up as if, being a saint was the greatest thing you could do, and the most important thing, but also the most normal thing, because it was, she sort of got it from all different angles. And the saint, I think, that probably had the most profound effect on her was Saint Ursula, who, was an English martyr, and she ends up, founding an order named after her.
The Ursulines. And, I want to back up just a little bit too, Rob. I did not have the experience of learning about the saints when I was growing up, cradle Catholic. And it wasn't until we started homeschooling and I just started devouring these saints and wanting to know more about each one of them. And their stories were so incredible and helpful for me personally. So I started to do that with our children. I made a calendar, and whoever's feast day it was that day, it happened to be the Franciscans that I happened upon. So it was Franciscan saint usually of the day. And I really enjoyed that, and just having that understanding of these friends that we have in heaven. So I really encourage that kind of a devotion too with your children. We've talked. It seems to be the theme of this.
Well, we just forget the power of story to form people, right? Like you can catechize all day long, but often incorporating truths into stories and seeing how it's lived out actually has a more profound effect on people, right?
This vision that she had of her sister coming off the ladder and telling her what her role was to be, what her vocation was to be. Did this happen over a period of time, or was it just a once and done?
Yeah, it was a one and done thing. She just has this vision.
Wow. All right. And founding the Ursulines, how did this vision of hers differ from traditional religious life? What would you say?
So what is definitely different about it is the manner in which the sisters would live their lives out, right? So they didn't, this first time that, they don't go to a convent, so they're consecrated and they live in the world. And so, they would they would grow where they're planted, right? And they would serve where they were planted. And they would exercise their apostolate wherever they were. So she starts with these 12 women, and, they're not living in community, they're living where they live. And, one of the sort of, I think, beautiful pieces of it is the way they, especially like historically the time, because it's during the Renaissance where paganism's kind of coming back, Protestant Revolution. And so like everything is just sort of a mess, right? And what they did is there's this sort of visible witness of, consecrated virginity lived out in a pagan culture. And it shows, sort of the opposite of what St. Anthony shows is that you can belong entirely to God and yet still be in the world, which was the message that was needed at the time because, people are embracing all kinds of decadence and the culture is sort of in decline.
Wow. So, I've got so many questions about starting the Ursulines and where we are today with Ursulines, but I don't want to jump ahead just right now. Before I do that, she obviously faced obstacles, and was it mostly concentrated in that northern Italy region? Did it spread out from there, or?
Yeah, for her lifetime, it was there. It was in that area. Obviously, it has spread from then. A lot of her obstacles were just the culture. Like she got a lot of support in the church. She made, and some of them I think were health too. So she had made a pilgrimage to Rome. She made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and she ended up blind, and then miraculously got her sight back. But then she also makes a pilgrimage to Rome, meets Pope Clement VII, and he loves her. And he asks her, like, will you stay in Rome and, and lead some charitable works I have here? And she tells him no, like, I have this call. And he says, go do your call, go do your thing. And so she was pretty well received in the church, almost too well received, right? Because I'm sure that was a temptation when the Holy Father's asking you to do something, to say no. But yeah, so mostly it was just, she had a very sort of like a peaceful and unifying spirit. She was very good at counsel, very good at, like neighbors would come to her and they would ask her to mediate. And so she had this deep desire for unity in a time when, like, obviously, like, the unity of the church is under attack. And, in a certain sense, it like tore her apart, but she always remained faithful. Right. And she thought that the path back to unity was through the church, through, the Orthodox faith of the church. And so that's why she sort of saw as her mission as to find, and catechize young women so that, they could then teach their children the faith and, on and on and on. Right. And so, in that way, like her vision, like, is a beautiful vision that, like, is a win-win.
Here we go again with that hidden power of faithfulness. And I'm trying to visualize unity. You said she was peaceful and had this unifying spirit. So give me some examples of how someone, maybe even St. Angela, would do that with those that she encountered. What does that look like?
Well, so there's, in some of her biographies, there's stories of just neighbors coming to her and they have a beef with each other.
Okay.
And I think when you have that gift, in a certain sense, God gives that gift to certain people where, they can, they say something and it just seems reasonable, right? Like just the way they say it. Mm-hmm. And so I think people would just listen to her. And in a certain sense, because of her holiness, they saw her as like really kind of like the voice of God in a certain sense. And so they would listen to her. Right. And so I think like what it really looks like, right, is like somebody who is like has the odor of sanctity, and how that just draws people. And it also creates trust, right? Because ultimately that's, if you're going to be a unifying force, like people have to trust you. And, and the only sort of way to be trustworthy is to be holy.
Mm-hmm. That was well said, Rob. Final question here about St. Angela Merici. Legacy today, particularly in education and the formation of lay leadership. I think she's a good leader in that. Yeah,
as we sort of talked about. So she, like her mission was to sort of educate young women. And that way she was way ahead of her time. And in a sort of, it's easy to think, oh, well, like, the patriarchy was stamping down women. And like, but the truth is, like, at that time, most people weren't educated. Because in a lot of ways, people didn't necessarily think like education was necessary, like a good in and of itself, right? Like if someone had particular talents, then yeah, totally worth like educating them, and man or woman, right? Like, so there's plenty of examples, there's 2 or 3 women doctors of the church that come out of this time, right? That are educated. And so, but what she really understood was that, a life of holiness and a life of virtue was really difficult without a good education, in the virtues, in like practical things, and being catechized. And so I think in that way, like it's revolutionary, yes, because it's aimed towards women, but it also forces people to sort of begin and go, well, actually, like education is good for people. Like it doesn't just, and I think sometimes maybe we go too far now to that, but certainly like, without her, maybe that doesn't emerge the way it does, where, just the common person gets an education where they, they can read and write and like know the faith. And so I think in that way, like that, her legacy probably, is overlooked. Like we just, we take that for granted. And then of course, just the idea of, very much fitting with the Second Vatican Council's called, the universal call to holiness was just, everyone is called to holiness. And that, women, at home with their children are called to holiness, just like, the consecrated women, in cloister.
Yes, very well said. Okay, I'm going to do something new that I have not done with you before, Rob. I want you to think of one virtue that stands out in each of these saints, and maybe say a little something about how we can utilize those virtues in our own life and implement them, I guess. So, St. André, what would you say?
Yeah, I think his is obedience.
Yeah.
Right, obedience. And I think, so obedience is a hard one, right? Because, we live in a democratically spirited culture, and we don't necessarily like the idea of obedience. I was giving a talk last night to a group of young adults, and we were talking about wives obey your husband. And one of the things that I talked about was, actually, if you begin to think about responsibility, right? Like every woman wants her husband to take responsibility, right? And all obedience is letting someone take responsibility, right? And so I think the way we live out obedience is to take responsibility for the things we're supposed to take responsibility for, right? And because, not all of us necessarily have like, a religious superior over us or anything, right? And so I think like, and that is exactly what St. André did. Like he took responsibility, right? Took responsibility for every person that came through the door, because that's what his rule of life said he was supposed to do. And so, we may not like the word obedience, but certainly if you flip it around and call it responsibility, it becomes a little different, right?
Very well said. All right, St. Anthony of the Desert. What would you
his
say?
is zeal, right? Like every time, like
praying for zeal every morning.
Yeah, every morning.
Okay. And St. Angela Merici, what would you say about her?
What I'm particularly, I think, struck with her is just generosity, right? Like generosity of because in a certain sense, like she had to be willing to just like take things as they came, right? Because she didn't have the wherewithal. She didn't necessarily have the wherewithal. She didn't have necessarily the power to just go off by herself and be with God, right? Like she knew like what this is going to require is a generous spirit and be able to, whoever I encounter, wherever I encounter them, give them everything I have.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. It doesn't matter who you encounter, choosing to have a generous heart and, listening well requires patience and presence. So, wow, that's great. Okay, obedience, zeal, and generosity. Rob, thank you so much for this. It's always so incredibly meaningful, and your time that you put into this is so much appreciated. So, God bless you. All right. If you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope and saints and feast days, you can find them all at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows. And don't forget, you can take FaithWorks with you wherever you go. Just download the free Divine Mercy Radio app from your app store. Simply search Divine Mercy Radio NC, and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere. St. Andre, St. Anthony, and St. Angela. I just realized that. Please pray for us. God bless.